Hello and welcome to the July 9th edition of the Bubb Report. I am Rion Charles. The 5th and 6th form students at the private Trinity College in Mocha, Trinidad, who were denied the opportunity to participate in the graduation ceremony and receive their certificates, set off a national outcry in Trinidad and Tobago over hair grooming policies in schools. This firestorm spurred the Rowley-led PNM administration to enact the first of its kind hair grooming policy following consultations with stakeholders nationwide. The issue of hair grooming in public and private schools across the Caribbean highlights the tensions between strict colonial-era hair grooming legacies and the need to relax hair codes that disproportionately discriminate against hairstyles worn by children of African descent. In 2019, Leslie Morton Taylor sent a pre-action protocol letter to the principal of St. Stevenson's College in Trinidad after her 15-year-old daughter, Kalika Morton, was warned against wearing Bantu knots in school. In August 2020, shy of Emancipation Day, Jamaica's High Court ruled in favor of the Kensington Primary School in a litigation brought against it by the parents of a 7-year-old girl with dreadlocks.
That won't hold her down for long. And my daughter, she's really strong and she knows that she is pretty regardless of what anybody has to say to her. So, she'll be fine. I will not be cutting my daughter.
You go through all of that and you reach a stage at 2020 where you hear people discriminated against I and I with locks, and even people are not Rastafarian with locks, which is, I can't find the right word to say, which is way behind time. It's like, it's so discriminatory that you can't even explain it really. You know what I'm saying? We have children, we have grandchildren, we have other children coming in this world, and we won't tell them that you're not to be happy or beautiful or feel beautiful or know you're beautiful because of your natural hair. You know what I'm saying? They have children going to school with weeds, and every minute you see them hitting the head and all that kind of stuff from whatever, waxing it and whatever. We don't care ourselves dirty. You know what I'm saying? We're very clean. Rastafarians are very extremely clean. Everybody know that.
This week, we discuss the evolution and management of hair grooming policies in Caribbean schools. The Trinidad and Tobago government aims to take the lead in dismantling the colonial-era policy while maintaining a collegial environment for students in public and private schools. Also in the report, as Grenada's south coast continues to expand and develop, the challenges of maintaining its pristine environment continue to be an issue for some residents in the area. On the True Blue side of Prickly Bay, residents have been raising the alarm about the unusually high levels of sewage discharge suspected to be from yachts in the area. They say the issue has been happening in varying volumes for over a decade. A few miles north of Prickly Bay is the issue of the proposed construction of an industrial boatyard. The Coral Cove Group in Lansopine applied for judicial review to the court with the intention of revoking the project, which was approved by the Physical Planning Authority. Some residents in Lansopine say that the new Physical Planning Board can revoke the permit without having to pay compensation to the developer, who they say has already violated the conditions under which the consent was granted. Finally, the Bubb Report pays tribute to Madonna Harford, who transitioned on Friday, July 7th after a prolonged battle with cancer.
The Minister for Health would have indicated to us earlier on that she was getting about 153 posts of registered nurses in the system. That has not happened.
Mrs. Harford served in different capacities in government, rising to the role of permanent secretary. After her retirement, she was elected president of the Grenada Public Workers Union and served as president of the Grenada Trades Union Council. We remember Mrs. Harford as a steadfast champion of workers' rights and an avid supporter of youth development. We thank her for her service to the people of Grenada and the Caribbean. We welcome our guests, Dr. Nyan Gasby-Dolly, Trinidad and Tobago's Minister of Education, Hayden Redhead, environmental activist, Christopher Husbands, General Manager of the National Water and Sewage Authority, Roger England, member of the Coral Cove Group, and Brian Grimes, President of the Grenada Public Workers Union. Here is our host, Dr. Kellon Bubb, with this week's editorial titled Heralding the Legacy of the Late Madonna Harford. We thank you for joining us.
Up, and I believe I was muted all along. And again, I have to do this all over again. I apologize, viewers and listeners, for this. But we are going to repeat the editorial because I do want to respect the time of the Minister of Education of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, who is here. As I was saying, this program is being live streamed on Trinidad and Tobago television. So we thank them for doing that on our behalf. But Minister of Education, Dr. Nyan Gasby-Dolly, welcome to the Bubb Report.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. And certainly we were having this conversation for about 2 weeks when this
Yes.
incident emerged. And so
Yes.
we thank you for agreeing. And I want to thank your public relations person for really walking us through that process. Now, Minister Gasby-Dolly, as we said in the introduction,
that incident at the Trinity College sparked a national outcry, but the debate seemed to have been polarized in many respects. There are those who say that the students should be following the rules and that the parents essentially were encouraging lawlessness, while there are others who say that the time has come for us to have a conversation rooted around relaxing some of those colonial era policies. Is that the sentiment on the ground?
I think those accurately capture the different variations of the conversation. The fact is that the ministry took the position that we support our schools and our principals with regards to the rules that they have and they must maintain at our school. Our society is based on our ability to keep our rules. However, so that's one aspect of it. However, the other aspect is, was the graduation the correct time to enforce these rules and, to precipitate a situation that actually played itself out at the graduation? And then the third dimension would have been, is it time to take a look at the rules? So there were actually three different types of scenarios swirling in that one situation. And so what the outcome of it was really dealing with two of them, meaning what happens at a graduation at a school, and of course what happens in terms of the rules for hair and hair grooming and hair code.
Now, did those rules apply to the sitting of exams? Because those students were allowed to sit their exams.
They did. And, what we have to understand is the effect of COVID on our schools. And sometimes these issues are not coming to the fore. We speak about the learning loss and we do things to deal with the learning loss, but there were other things that happened. So one thing that happens is that boys grew their hair. In the 2 years, many of our students were away from school for 2 years. And at that time, the barbershops were closed. Different things were happening. And boys grew their hair. So the ministry's guideline is well groomed. But of course, schools are and were able to interpret that in different ways. So in the year that the students have been back at school, what the principal and the administration has been saying is that they have been working with the boys to enforce their rule, because their rule at that particular school is that the hair should have been short. So yes, the boys were at school for a year. Yes, there were instances of suspension. Yes, the school did speak to them about their hair and so on. And yes, they wrote exams. Yes, they participated in different events. And that is where the underlying question about, was the graduation the appropriate time, regardless of the fact, and it is a fact, that the school did say to parents and students that their hair should be following the school's hair rules at the graduation. So yes, they did sit exams.
Absolutely. Now, Minister, when that incident unfolded, you were one of those people, and that is what drew us to reaching out to your team on your Facebook page and through public comments by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. You indicated that the time has come for this conversation to happen. Yeah. And it appears as though outside of making those public pronouncements, you also held consultations with stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago. Can you talk to us about what that process looked like and what was the nature of the feedback received as a result?
So what we did in Trinidad and Tobago, yes, I agree that the time did come, because this issue has come up before. It's been a bubbling issue. But the fact is, in 2022, a lot of our students spent 2 years out of school. So when they came back into the classroom in April, that last term of the 2021-2022 academic year, they came out in April of 2022. And there were a number of disciplinary issues. And I think around the world, we experienced that kind of upheaval, because our students were now coming back to the classroom, getting back into that level of discipline. And though this issue came up before, even with my own son, when he went back out to school, his hair was long as well. And even when he went back out to school, we faced this challenge at the school he is going to, because the school rules did not allow for long hair. And so at that time, though, because we were dealing with learning loss, because we were dealing with principals now having to reintegrate students into the classroom who wouldn't have been in school for 2 years, it was not the appropriate time to deal with this conversation. However, our students have been successfully at school for an entire academic year after the COVID experience. And so now it is the appropriate time. It was the appropriate time to address this issue. And so what we would have done at the ministry level, we would have done our research, looked at what's happening regionally, happening internationally, and we met as ministry officials and technocrats, and we came up with a position. And so we advanced this position to our stakeholders before the actual meeting with the stakeholders, just before, so that they had a little time to get acquainted with our position for discussion as the ministry. And so when we met our stakeholders, a wide body of stakeholders, we discussed that position and their views on those positions and any other recommendations they would have had. And so based on the ministry's position, our stakeholders' views, we synthesized the hair code, and that is what we have advanced in the nation, and that is what we're going to implement.
So let us talk about these new hair codes. Are they guidelines or are they expected to be enforced? And the reason I ask this question is because Trinity College Mocha, they in a statement they indicated that they were going to stand by their position. In fact, they dug their heels in, if you will. So how will these guidelines be enforced? What do you say to academic institutions who have had these guidelines for eons?
The fact is, the Trinity College's position is that they are going to abide by their rules, and that's every school's position. And that is the ministry position, that students should abide by the rules of the school. What this hair code has done is it has expanded the range and really put some organization to what's been happening at the schools. At many schools, you would see students with long hair, but what's been happening, the ministry's guideline was only well groomed. And that could be interpreted in several ways. So what the ministry has
Sounds
done,
very open-ended.
yes, and that's how it's been for many years. So what the ministry has now done by introducing a hair code is actually put more detail to what can be considered at a school or what has to be considered at a school. And therefore, we have set a school based on some models that we have seen both locally as well as abroad. Engage a hair committee, parents, students, and the school's administration. And you now, within the context of the fact that you are allowing locks, twists, afro, braids, long hair, Trinidad is very multicultural, and therefore we have a range of hair types in Trinidad and Tobago. So on the basis of the fact that these are now to be allowed at school, you come up for your individual school with those granular details of, the length of, for example, the length of a girl's braids. For example, the length of hair, natural hair, you're going to allow. Are you going to allow it to be as long as it can be, or is there going to be some restriction? The difference between girls and boys. What is okay for a boy in terms of the size of an afro? What's okay for a girl in terms of a weave? These granular details have to be determined by a school because it's a very unique school culture. We have over 850 schools in Trinidad and Tobago, 134 of them being secondary schools. And so you have a difference in culture. We have denominational secondary schools that are government assisted, therefore public schools. We have totally government schools. So, and within the denominational schools, you have the Muslim schools, the Hindu schools, the Anglican schools, the Roman Catholic schools, the Presbyterian schools. So you have a wide range of schools. So it's important for us in Trinidad and Tobago to still leave room for that individual school culture. So when the schools, on the basis of the national code, which must be kept, they are going to make their individual school hair rules, and that will speak more to the individual types of hairstyles that are allowed within the national context. And yes, they are to be observed.
What has been the reaction from the stakeholders that you have been meeting with?
Well, as I drew to the attention of our stakeholders in our introduction, the well-groomed guideline of the ministry has been interpreted in different ways in our schools, and they have their rules. However, any school that has a rule right now that's hair has to be short for males, that rule is generally being observed and honored in the breach. I've been visiting schools since our schools have reopened. I've been to over 200 of our schools, and I can tell you that there are in many of our schools boys with long hair. And so what this is actually doing is bringing some organization to what exists. And so there's been really general support for the measure because we've understood that societal norms have changed, they have evolved, and therefore we must evolve along with them, keeping the principles of it. So it's well groomed, neat, clean. These are subjective, but these are the main things that we want to ensure our schools, our students conform to. So there's been general acceptance and agreement in our meeting. The stakeholders were very open about the different recommendations they would like to suggest, and we did take that into consideration as we crystallized the hair code. And so we're looking forward to that level of support, and they have been open about their support for this measure.
Now, let us talk about, again, and a lot of this seems to be, again, subjective in terms of length. I see one viewer is saying, well, how do you determine how short the hair should be? How do you determine, cropped, half 1 inch, 2 inches, etc.? But that's one of the nuances there, because this is a nuanced conversation. But one of the things that you articulated to me on background was that you, in your research, you found that there was no unifying policy on such an issue. So it would appear as if Trinidad and Tobago is attempting to lead the way in respect of putting a policy in place in line with what I would propose would be a sort of a post-colonial way of treating with notions of hair grooming. Yes?
Mm-hmm. We've looked at, in the region, we've seen Anguilla in 2022, they would have introduced a hair code. We've looked at across the international spectrum, there's the Crown Act, the Halo Act. We've looked at Thailand. There's a lot going on in Thailand in terms of their students and what they would like to do in terms of revolutionizing their own hair codes. So it's not limited to our region. It's international, where you have students looking for that level of agency and, self-expression. And within our context in Trinidad and Tobago, we are putting things in place that suit our context. We don't want our students necessarily to just have to come to school with their hair in any type of form, but we don't want to restrict them. And especially as we have a multicultural and multi-ethnic society, we don't want to restrict them from a level of self-expression. And so we have looked to put something in place that works for us, looking at what's happening regionally and internationally, but working for Trinidad and Tobago's society. And it's important for us too to have the students have an input, and that's one of the critical areas where we want our students to be able to have that level of agency, to have a say into what happens at a school. And that's why the ministry's guidelines are broad as they are and don't seek to go into those granular levels of detail. These things are best left to the school, meaning the principal, the students, the administration, and parents to come up with those granular details. And we are sure that when students do this, they will be the ones to police and to buy in, because they've had a chance to have a say about what they think is reasonable for self-expression and still within the context of neat, clean, not distracting, and really disciplined in our schools.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the fact that you are getting student input, I suppose that would be the student leaders at the various institutions, prefects, scouts.
So I would expect that the schools and the principals would make those decisions. All schools have a prefect system, and so we expect that. Most schools have a PTA, Parent Teachers Association, so we would expect to see those persons. And the National PTA Association was a part of our stakeholder consultations. And so we expect that at every level, they would be involved in ensuring that their members are a part of that discussion. And that's been circulated to the principals, that this is the composition. So we are looking forward, and we've seen it work at one of our prominent schools in Trinidad and Tobago, that coming together of the students and the teachers for the most workable outcome that I think the students are very pleased with, because they have that level of agency and they have a voice.
Mm-hmm. Have you been able to consult and speak with the students, the students who were impacted at Trinity College, Mocha, the students, the parents, and how are they doing? Obviously, graduation, it's a capstone moment for anyone. I remember my graduation day from the presentation college in Grenada. We do have a presentation College in Grenada, viewers in Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
But what conversations have you had with them?
As a minister, I haven't had any conversations directly with the parents and the students of Trinity College. However, I've seen their responses they've been very open on social media about the experiences, and the actual contributions from the students have varied. So I've seen students who said, they felt embarrassed. I've seen students who said, we knew what was going to happen. We were warned before, but we made the decision. I've seen contributions from parents who've also said that, yes, they were aware, but they were willing to take that stand at the time. So I've seen the principal's report as well. So coming directly to the ministry, as well as what they released to the public. There were two different documents. So I've seen a lot of different sides of the conversation, and a lot of that would have, contributed to our considerations as we would have dealt with this here code.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Minister, I want to switch gears a bit. In Grenada, we're having a conversation around universal secondary education. Our Prime Minister in Grenada, he indicated that no child should be left behind in really fully implementing universal secondary education. Now, Minister, the first question I have in respect of the universal secondary education policy in Trinidad and Tobago is, are all children advanced to the high school level? And what methodology does your ministry have in place to ensure that those students who might be quote unquote slow or who have different learning styles are actually catered for when they get to a high school?
So in the year 2000, I believe, we would have drawn the line in the sand in Trinidad and Tobago with regards to universal secondary education. But for some time before that, you did have mainly all students getting to secondary school. At this point, all of our students go to secondary school. However, our students do entrance level placement exam. So we call it the secondary entrance assessment in Trinidad and Tobago, where you do a test to determine if you pass for schools of your choice. So students are allowed to choose 4 schools at the end of primary school, and then they do this SEA. And that, if you do very well, you get into your first choice or your second choice, third choice, fourth choice, etc. So we do have that placement examination, high stakes placement examination system operating in Trinidad and Tobago. So all of our students go on to secondary school, with the exception of those who are under 13 years old and who have not made over 30% in the examination. If you fall into that category, then you have to resit. You're offered a chance to resit the examination at your primary school. So basically you repeat a year. And so those students, for example, maybe 3% on average of students would have to resit the examination. And so they stay back in primary school and they do it over. All of the other students are promoted to the secondary school level on the basis of their choice. And if they did not score the marks to get into any of their choices, then they are placed at a school that is closest to them. So you call it the zoning process. Placed in a school, a government school that's closest to them. And so what happens is, at our secondary school, especially because of what happened with COVID and the exacerbation of the learning loss at COVID, we have selected 26 of our secondary schools that are the lowest performing at the CXC level, and who would get most of the students who are under 30, but have to be promoted to the secondary school because of age. We would now, in those schools, we are implementing the remedial education program. That program deals with the type of teaching they get. It also deals with the syllabus for Forms 1 and 2, so that we are able to give those students a chance at gaining their primary school skills up to Form 2 of the secondary school, because you see it as very important that those fundamental skills are not skipped over. So their syllabus has to be a different syllabus, catering for them to be able to do what is formally a primary school leaving exam in Form 2, because those skills are important. We also have life centers in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have students who, for one reason or the other, are not at the level of secondary school. And so we have students promoted to the life centers where they do vocational skills and learning. We also have the serval centers where students can also pursue vocational learning up to that level. And then after that, we have tertiary level and post-secondary institutions that do technical and vocational training. So we have YTEP, we have NESC, and so students can pursue a technical level coming out of the secondary schools. But at the secondary level, we do have the life centers, and then at the secondary schools, we have a different curriculum to be followed for some students based on their percentage in the SE, which is the placement exam.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, and the final question around that, zoning. I suppose students' placements in secondary schools depends on the zone in which the district or in which they live?
No, it doesn't. It actually depends on their grade and their choices. So they have 4 choices. And if they score enough to place into, well, it's a complicated system that grades our students and places them. So if you have the top scores, then you can go to the schools that you choose. If you, of course, more students would choose a particular school than can be accommodated. So there may be students who may score at the level to get into a school, but if the school is full because persons scored higher than that, then they come to their second choice. So as they come down in the choices based on their performance, if they do not get into any of the schools they've chosen, then they will be placed into a secondary school that is closest to their home address. So that's where the zoning comes in. So a student from south of the island is free to choose a school that is north of the island. Once they score the correct grades and they can get into the school, then they are free to attend that school. And that happens in a lot of cases.
Okay, absolutely. Minister, is there any final comments? I want to thank you and your public relations personnel for really facilitating this today for us. And of course, Trinidad and Tobago Television in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, who are also carrying this live on TTT television. Minister?
I just want to say that, the education system has to be very fluid and dynamic, because we're living in very different and changing times. And so the Ministry of Education is committed to serving our population. Our mandate is to, provide quality, modern, and relevant education to our students. And that is exactly what we will continue to do as we work with all of our stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago to influence the education, not just in our country, but also in the region.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, the Honorable Nyan Gasby-Dolly, who is the Minister of Education in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. She joined us today to talk about new policy in respect of hair grooming that the PNM administration is about to roll out for the new school year on the backs of the Trinity College Mocha firestorm, which ignited a debate that continues to happen across the Caribbean in respect of what many say are colonial era hair grooming policies. So at this point, we will take a quick break, and what I will do is I will come back to repeat the editorial that unfortunately was muted at the top of the program. So please stand by, viewers and listeners. We will be right back here on the Bubb Report.
Listeners, I see Michael already smiling. He anticipates what I would say. My good friend.
Yeah, and I put my head on a block, and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off.
The political leader has said several times up to last night that is not a reflection of her personal views or the views of the party. And you understand, George, how elections at the party level work.
So, Dr. Pei, do you have ties? Do you have ties to the National Democratic Congress, Dr. Pei? Or rather, were you commissioned by the NDC to do this poll?
Information because it seems interesting that a lot of your advice is very consistent with what was said. Brilliant.
And Claudette, good luck with everything. You too, man.
May the best candidate win in the town of St. George.
But kill on.
Yes.
You is a tough man too, so stop it up. Tell everybody you are a tough man too.
We are a people who have always aspired for more, who always aspired to do better, who've always accepted that not because your mother didn't go to secondary school, you should go. It has always been the other way around. You should aspire.
You've been there for a long time. Want to be queen of St. Andrews, but yet the problems around you you're not seeing. You can pray yourself out of the problems in St. Andrews.
And if you're not careful with how and what you say on radio, you will cause people to fight here.
I thrive on that controversy. Some people hate it, but I love it. In other words, every time something goes viral, it's about Kem Jones.
Some persons were getting pension after 2 terms in office, right? And the persons that work for 26 years plus not getting anything. It's just unfair.
God is good, and God looks after me. You know, not just my wife is no longer here, so both herself and the father up there are looking after me very, very well indeed.
Not a few people that you pick up by the side of the road to run in an election. These are not people that you mustered up and you pulled together a few months before you think an election is going to call, and you say, we want to win an election, so let's come together.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to the Bubb Report. Now, before we get to the panel segment of the week, we are going to repeat the editorial that was unfortunately muted at the top of the program. And for this editorial, we are paying tribute to the late Madonna Harford. Now, it is all too common that death comes in threes. And the Grenadian professional class was hit hard last week with the loss of 3 outstanding citizens who added to the rich mosaic of Grenadian life. These 3 ladies, all with varying degrees of lived experiences, served with passion and grit, and for the betterment of their country and humanity. Today on the Bubb Report, we pause to remember one of those women whose dedication to public service exceeded all expectations through her diligence and love for country. Sister Madonna Harford was born in one of the darkest Septembers of 1950s Grenada, in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Janet. Perhaps this crisis was a harbinger for the many crises she navigated later in her life on behalf of public servants. She served as president of the Public Workers Union and the Grenada Trades Union Council at a time of deep economic tumult in Grenada, and at a time when the previous NNP administration proposed amendments to the labor code which attempted to undermine a worker's right to withdraw their labor. After assuming the leadership of the union in April of 2003, Mrs. Harford and her team led several campaigns which called for regional leaders to find a solution to the CLICO policy. Now, the cash-strapped company CLICO had an issue where many of their clients lost their money. Now, the demise of its parent company, the Trinidad-based CL Financial, also caused Madonna Harford to lead a protest outside of CARICOM head's government meeting in Grand Anse. Sister Harford also navigated the difficult decision of accepting a 3-year wage freeze in 2014, as Grenada was forced to enter into a structural adjustment program with the International Monetary Fund. Not only was she a trade unionist, but she also served on government's negotiating team during her tenure as permanent secretary. This gave her a unique view of the workings of government on both sides of the fence. Now, in paying tribute, fellow public servant Gemma Bain Thomas said, quote, "A selfless professional who devoted herself to public service in the interest of the people she served and her country. A model of a phenomenal woman and public officer," unquote. I personally got to know Sister Harford as a young reporter, eager to understand the nuances of covering labor relations issues. She was always willing to freely share and impart her institutional knowledge on the rules that govern personnel management in the public service, as well as the context that informed wage negotiations. Following the debut of the Bubb Report in May of 2020, Madonna Harford was a steadfast viewer, offering many positive and constructive comments on issues animating life in the national community in the comments section every Sunday. I will personally miss Sister Harford as we communicated from time to time via WhatsApp, interactions which were meaningful and fulfilling. And I end with this poem titled, We Talk About Her. We talk about her because she deserves to be remembered. We talk about her because even though she's not physically with us, she is never far from our minds. We talk about her because she is part of us, part of what we could never ignore or disown. We talk about her because we love her still and will always love her. Forever, nothing will ever change that. May Sister Madonna Harford rest in peace, and may her memory be a blessing. And at this point, we wish to welcome our panelists for this morning's installment of the Bubb Report. I am joined by Mr. Christopher Husbands, who is the General Manager of NAWASA Grenada, as well as Mr. Hayden Redhead, who is an environmentalist, and Mr. Roger England of the Coral Cove Group. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, what we want to do, we're going to break this conversation up in two parts, but we want to begin with Mr. Redhead and Mr. Husbands. With Mr. Redhead, now, we were drawn to a post that you shared via a Grenadian national interest group, in which you spoke about unusually high levels of sewer discharge in the True Blue Bay area. Why were you concerned about this? And based on what you indicated, this was not happening. This is not a recent development. You indicated that this was happening for a while.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bubb, and welcome to all the viewers, listeners, and of course, Mr. Husbands on the panel. It was concerning because while we have seen discharge from yachts in the bay over the decades that my family has lived here, the volume has been increasing. And I would say it should be concerning to any citizen if you have raw sewage being discharged in public areas when our civilization, our society is based on certain guidelines and certain sanitary and health guidelines. We have observed an increase in the large discharges, which, to be honest, we are struggling to determine the exact source, because there are some discharges that occur in the Prickly Bay, so True Blue on one side, Lansepine on the other, area that could not possibly come from a single yacht. I'm talking about waste discharge in the range of hundreds of gallons of raw sewage. As well, I did want to raise the issue of, we do have some apartment buildings in True Blue which support the St. George's University students and faculty that house dozens of guest tenants. And currently, some of them are not attached to the NAWASA sewer system. So they discharge openly into a plot of land that exists close to the sea on the opposite side of True Blue, and that makes its way into the ocean on that side. So you find that we're inundated in this particular area with three areas of concern: the large discharges, the consistent discharges from the yachting sector. I mean, I have been crying out for assistance on this for quite some time. And when I couldn't take it anymore, I did my own research and paid for my own testing to be done. So I would have hired a drone operator. And on one particular point in time, a year and a half ago, there were 140 yachts housed in the Prickly Bay area. Now, 140 yachts with residents on them. And it was my understanding that the laws of Grenada required you to be out at sea to discharge your waste. But the honest truth is, Dr. Bubb, most of these yachts do not move from their moorings for, in many cases, weeks, months. And in some cases, I can attest that some have not moved out of Frickley Bay because I live right here for years on end. So we know, and through interventions with people in the industry, we've learned that many of these yachts do not have function in holding tanks. Many of them who have function in holding tanks don't operate them. So they just flush the waste directly into the ocean. Now, you may ask, what concern is that to me? Well, it's a concern to me because my family, myself, and friends interact almost on a daily basis with the ocean. So apart from the smell and apart from the visual and the health concerns, you have the issues arising now of what is referred to in marine biology as nutrification, an influx into the ocean of high levels of nutrient from the human and even pet waste, because lots of these persons have cats and dogs, and these waste is getting into the sea. And to be honest, there's been a proliferation of algae and weed blooming in the area, and that has significantly, in my mind, contributed to the death of the coral reefs in the area. And right now, some of the weed and algae that's proliferating inside here are of the anatomical makeup of a net. So it will be killing, literally killing. And you think sargassum is bad? We have constant landfalls of all different types of algae and weed based on the nutrification in the area. And we've seen significant die-offs of several species.
We are not. We lost your audio there,
Okay,
Mr. Redhead.
sorry. Yeah,
we lost your audio there. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm saying my family and few others in this area use the sea, but many members of society, many Grenadian citizens and visitors visit these locations, in particular the one where the apartments let out, and don't know what they're bathing in. They don't know what they're fishing in. So basically, I think it needs to be a great concern. When I did water testing 2 years ago, the levels of human waste in the water, according to the Bureau of Standards, was 5 times the acceptable level in this area.
Okay. All right. Let me bring in Mr. Christopher Husbands. Of course, Mr. Husbands, you are the general manager of NAWASA Grenada, and of course, people tend to think of you only as dealing with water supply issues, but there is a major sewage management component to your remit. Talk to us first of all about the role of NAWASA in ensuring that yachts maintain best practices in respect of sewer management.
All right. Morning. Let me say good morning to your viewers and listeners, and of course, my other panelists. Yes. The answer to that question is really and truly, NAWASA has no role regarding the waste disposal of yachts. But let me just back up a bit, because you are correct. NAWASA has a role, and that is the SA in the name. But wastewater treatment on island is split between 2 agencies. So NAWASA's role, as per its legislation, pertains to 2 traditional public systems. We operate and maintain the public system in the south of the island, which basically covers, in simple terms, from Foliage to True Blue. And also the original system, which covers the main areas in and around the town of St. George. Over the last few years, we have added some wastewater systems. We now operate the Mongay Housing Project, as well as the one up in Soubise. Generally, on-site disposal, which we, of course, are more familiar with as septic tanks and soakaways, are actually under the purview of the Ministry of Health. So we don't take part in it. So our sewage role is actually confined to just these two areas of the island and the public systems. And like I said, your question, we have no jurisdiction and no interface with yachts other than if a yacht pulls into the Port Louis Marina, they are connected to the sewer system, so we receive their waste. And efforts are advanced to connect one of the marinas in the True Blue area, which will also now be disposing its waste into the Nawassa public system.
Absolutely. But if they're not connected to those two catchment areas, then that's out of your wheelhouse there. Now let us talk about, obviously, Grenada, especially in the south of the island, has expanded rapidly and significantly over the last 20 years at least. How is Nawassa keeping up with that demand? We just heard Mr. Redhead here speak about the fact that perhaps one of the apartments are not necessarily connected to sewer lines. How are we keeping up with the demand for ensuring that wastewater is properly treated?
I mean, we continue to work with persons in sewer areas. It is something that we would have liked to see a greater uptake on. We installed that sewage system in True Blue, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago again. And that was in response to some of the concerns that Mr. Redhead alluded to, that there was really and truly inadequate wastewater disposal. And it's largely because of the density and really and truly the time frame that True Blue has just mushroomed. So we put the wastewater system in to at least provide a first level of improvement. There are some persons that still haven't been connected. COVID hit and the entire sector ground to a halt for a bit. So we certainly are going to be intensifying efforts now that things have become more stable. Persons had issues with financial institutions and their own business models. But I think sufficient time has passed that things certainly appear to have normalized. And I think greater efforts will be made to try to ensure that all persons, because generally, we had agreements from persons to connect who haven't fulfilled their obligations. And I certainly would expect that going forward, and I want to encourage persons, and I hope that you will also encourage persons in sewer areas to connect to the wastewater system. It's the right thing to do. We're a small island developing state, as we say, and our marine resources are one of the most valuable assets that we have, and we have to do all we can to protect them, especially from on-site and on-land sources of pollution.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Husbands, isn't there a specific legal obligation on the part of proprietors, property owners, to connect to the sewer treatment lines, barring penalties if they don't?
There are legal obligations that we have the ability to fall back on. But we have, as I said, taken the approach with this, and a large number of persons have complied. Let me not make it seem as though it's been all doom and gloom. A large number of persons have complied, and like I said, I foresee that there will be an increased compliance in short order. But we do have the Ministry of Health also has a legal some legal teeth that can also affect someone's occupancy. And we've used that in the past before. Don't get me wrong, it's not that it's never been used. But I said, in the situation specifically of True Blue, based on the timing and based on the whole advent of COVID and what it did, we did step back a bit and allow the sector to get back up and running. And certainly there will be increased efforts to ensure that everyone is connected.
Mm-hmm. Let me bring back Mr. Redhead. I saw you nodding when Mr. Husbands was encouraging a sense of personal responsibility there. Did you want to piggyback on anything he articulated here?
No, I just wanted to, I was nodding in agreement. Mr. Husbands and his team kept in contact with the community in Chublu. We have a residents association. We met several times with NOASA's team. Quite some lively discussions, but NOASA had indicated that the sewer system would be brought to bear right up to where those apartment buildings are. I'm not one known for pulling punches, so I'm not going to start today. So I would call on the authorities, going right back to the planning division, to ensure that the regulations now, instead of options being given, guidelines should be given as to someone shall, whatever the fancy terminology legal-wise is, connect to the sewer system, particularly, as Mr. Husbands mentioned, in terms of density of populations. We have some very large buildings down here housing a lot of students, faculty, and even some locals. And to be honest, the waste discharge has overwhelmed whatever was built very quickly. And I think one of the things the residents down here tend to discuss is, had these issues been occurring where more prominent, you would think that Chublu would receive some attention, where more prominent Grenadians or expats or government officials lived, maybe something would happen quicker. Because I have been talking about the yachting sector issues for decades, and it has not received the attention. I'll be honest with you, in an effort to assist, I have procured legislation from areas of the world that have state-of-the-art yachting sectors and provided that to the ministry to assist them with developing legislation locally that could support regulations and guidelines to improve the situation. It is not helped by the fact that a lot of the folks in the yachting sectors would say things to myself and others who speak to them on the issue, oh, don't worry, it's biodegradable. But it's not biodegradable when you run into it, taking a walk on a beach. And then, as I said, you would not accept that in your community. So why should we accept it in ours? In speaking to the Coast Guard, again, I'm saying things that were told to me. So at this point, it's hearsay, but it can be verified. I was told once by the Coast Guard that they do not train their trainees doing swimming maneuvers there anymore because of what they encounter in the water there. So it's an appeal here again. I have done it in person. I have done it, as I said, my social media would indicate that, to all concerned to support NOASA, not through just this initiative of the sewered persons hooking up, but through investment in a broader waste treatment facility in Grenada, so that, yes, when the waste does in fact make it to the ocean or into the land, it has already been at least primarily treated for basic issues and broken down into something that is at least a little more acceptable to the environment. So that is my final pitch, that we should all support. I will continue to advocate. I will continue to try to educate. But we are walking a very, very dangerous line where you have whole species dying off in areas. You have issues where you have the proliferation of dangerous algae levels, blooming because of the nitrification. We do need to pay particular attention before we cross a threshold we can no longer revert and walk back over.
Talk to us about those algae levels. I believe that marine biologists, environmentalists tend to be concerned when those algae levels gets too elevated.
Yes. Yeah. So what I do typically is when I discover something, I don't tell somebody what I think. I play as ignorant as I can and I ask the authorities. So the first one I brought to a marine biologist. She pulled out all her reference books. We went through it. And the first observation is it was not necessarily featured as an algae present in this ocean in Grenada. But she said to me when I was leaving, she said, Hayden, I do know it. And it tends to proliferate where there is human waste. And then I just nodded because I knew. The recent discovery of a type of algae here was so pervasive in the area where I live. You couldn't walk through the ocean without it tying up your legs. I showed some friends the pictures of it, and they thought I had discovered a ghost net, a ghost fishing net. it was of the anatomical structure of a net. And what do nets do? Capture and entangle animals and fish. So I'm saying again, the volumes here have become so that it is stifling the environment, the ocean, the near shore creatures are literally being killed. You cannot walk through in some areas, it's that much. It's carpeting in some areas. It looks like, it actually pictured can look like dirty water. And when you go to it, it's actually weed and algae that's just covering the ocean floor, the seabed.
All right. Certainly, that is extremely concerning, and it really goes against what we promote as a nation. We promote Grenada as pure Grenada, pure Grenada, a welcoming tourist destination. In fact, the True Blue area, many people frequent there for entertainment purposes. You do have several hotels, guest houses, Airbnbs in that area. Of course, people live there as well. There is the thinking that only SGU students and tourists are there, but people actually live there. In the same way people lived in Dusty Highway many years ago when they didn't fix those roads for many, many years. And people said, well, you know, these are quote unquote rich people or whatever the case might be, but they are Grenadians, they pay taxes too, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Dr. Bubb, my family was one of the first 4 families to live in True Blue when it was undesirable. It was just bush, briar, campeche, crabs, and mosquitoes here. And we moved in, proudly so. My father built the house in 1970, sorry. So you're talking about many decades of residence down here. And I'll be honest with you, it's played down that it's not, these issues are not serious. You're correct. It's considered in a lot of cases that we can just deal with it ourselves because all of us have money, but you're correct. A lot of ordinary people live in here as well, a lot of working class people. But it's a difficult situation to sit by and look on. I've tried my best through all measures. I was accused on several occasions of doing Grenada a disservice. But I think the disservice is to ignore the problem and allow it to balloon to something that's out of control, which then will affect Grenada in an irreversible manner. And not for our visitors and our tourism industry, but for our own indigenous people. There's a lot of movements afoot now of respecting our own people, respecting our soil, respecting our heritage. And these things I'm discussing on a consistent basis and raising attention to goes against all those principles.
Absolutely. And let me bring back Mr. Husbands here. Now, Mr. Husbands, enforcement, I think that is such a critical element of this. I was really surprised when you said today that it's more of a voluntary approach to ensuring that property owners' sewer lines are connected to the main sewer lines, especially in areas where they do not necessarily have the capacity for individual septic tanks, or perhaps where these buildings have outgrown those capacities. For future reference, Mr. Husbands, is that something that you will be working with other agencies to ensure that it's properly enforced?
All right, so maybe I need to just clarify that a little more.
Yes.
So you know, once a new development of any kind is done in a sewer area, it is mandatory that the property must connect to the sewage system as part of the approval process. That's across the board. The issue with True Blue is that you have projects that had been built and developed long before the sewer system was put in place 4 or 5 years ago. So some persons had actually invested quite a bit of money trying to put their own system in place, right? And in many cases, these weren't working, but there had been investments made on their behalf, putting in some provision for themselves. And that's why it is these properties that existed before the sewer system that we have exercised a bit of tolerance and you know, working together to get them done. But let me just make it clear that any new building that goes into an area, and that's just not True Blue alone, that's any area in the town of St. George, any area that's in the Grand Anse sewer area, has to connect to the sewer as a basis for the approval and for operation. So let me separate the two. So the True Blue one, as I said, is a matter of getting persons to come on board. And I'm going to repeat, because I think a number of them may be listening, and I don't want to be accused after the program of saying, but I have done, a number of persons have. But as Mr. Reddit pointed out, there still are a few that certainly greater effort will have to be made to get some compliance in short order. Okay. I think I would like, as I'm speaking here, to also indicate that, it's not just True Blue, right? We're doing a lot of work trying to improve wastewater collection and treatment island-wide. We're lacking with treatment so far. We only do preliminary screening. We have studies that have been done that we're following up on that give us areas that two wastewater treatment plants can go. And this certainly is an investment that we are in the process of discussing and trying to get adequately funded. We are also, Grenada is going to be the recipient of a grant from the Global Environmental Facility. I think it's about $400,000 that's going to look at one of those nature-based solutions for treatment. The site hasn't been confirmed yet. That's being done in conjunction with the Ministry of Climate Resilience. Now, us as a partner with the project funded through the Caribbean Development Bank for a grant for the New Mirabeau Abattoir, and I think the hospital is also included in that. So we're not sitting by and not looking at further wastewater development. As part of that new UK-funded water project, we're going to be replacing all the lines on the Carenage to ensure that we improve that system at the same time. And that will give us the ability to increase collection onto the Lagoon and Belmont areas. So a lot needs to be done, but there is certainly an acute awareness of the need for improved wastewater collection and consideration island-wide. And certainly we will continue to work to try to ensure that we continue to improve the standards throughout.
Mr. Husbands, I want to respect your time. So any final comments? I see that you are in the office, so it looks as though you made a trek from home to be on the Bubb Report. The sacrifices some of our guests make, including Mr. Brand Grimes here and Mr. England, who actually is not even in Grenada. He is in the UK. I'll be bringing in you shortly there, Mr. England. But thank you so much. So over to you for some final comments, Mr. Husbands.
Well, I think I would just say thank you for inviting us. And I certainly want to applaud Hayden for his continued diligence in certainly trying to get this issue under increased consideration. I think, as he mentioned, we continue to engage the True Blue residents and ensure that we hear their concerns, and we trying our best to ensure that we can do what is within our purview to address the situation. But like I said earlier on, there is a big part of this issue that is certainly outside of our purview. We have two outfalls. We have an outfall in Point Celine. We have an outfall off of the Green Bridge. And we do marine sampling every month. And based on our data, we have no information to suggest that there is any pollution from our outfalls that is making its way anywhere near True Blue, Lansepine, or any of those surrounding communities where they're bathing areas. Our outfall in Point Celine was specifically designed by a firm of ocean engineers to be located at a point where you have a mixing zone. You have a current that comes, what I would say, south along that Point Celine area. You also have a current on the eastern side, and the outfall was specifically placed in what they calculated was a mixing zone from which there is a general southwestern flow. So it was designed and put there to ensure that the wastewater does not make its way back. Yes, we've had some issues in the past. The outfall was damaged for a period of time, but we spent significant resources repairing it, and we will continue to monitor and ensure that we do our best to minimize any kind of environmental risk from wastewater collection and operations. A lot more needs to be done, especially on the wastewater treatment side. And I can assure you that we will continue to knock on doors. We have projects that have been prepared, and we have to continue to push those projects to get them funded and implemented in the shortest possible time. So thanks for having us. I thank the viewers and listeners, and I certainly hope we've been able to provide whatever clarity was needed to ensure that the messages we all need to be concerned with wastewater treatment and development. And for those persons in the south of the island, support NAWASA, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Redhead, I do want you to stay with us because I will be, since you are also in the south of the island, Mr. Husbands, thank you again for being on the report. But we will be bringing in Mr. Roger England of the Coral Cove Group, who is planning to sue and take the government to court in respect of a boatyard development there. Of course, Mr. Redhead, I want you to stay around because this all affects the general area. So what we will do, gentlemen, we will take a quick break and then we will come back with that conversation. So please stand by. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bubb Report social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.
Should your loved ones pass on, they deserve to be treated with dignity. And at S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, we can provide you with that service. We can take you every step of the way during your sorrowful moments. When that need arises, call S.A. Johnson Funeral Home at 347-777-9797. That's 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home is a Caribbean family-owned funeral home here in Brooklyn, providing funeral services, but in a dignified way. From cremation to burial to the repatriation of your loved ones, you don't have to go through the hassle, as we provide exceptional service that allows you to mourn and heal peacefully. For more information, visit our website, www.sajohnsonfuneral.org. Send us an email at sajfuneral@aol.com or call 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
Hello everyone, I am Chantal McGuire, your local bred Grenadian actuary and asset liability management expert. Are you satisfied with your current finances? Are you curious and constantly looking for ways to make additional income? Join me on the Bubb Report as we strive to empower you, our valued audience, to become more financially literate and help evolve Grenadians into a mindset that's investment focused and entrepreneurial. Literacy is about freedom. It's about being able to control your money and not letting your money control you. It's about foresight for a brighter future. Our core mission is to promote financial literacy and share money-generating opportunities for everyone. Join us on the last Sunday of every month, starting July 30th, as we strive to provide the keys to financial freedom.
And viewers and listeners, welcome back to the report. We will continue this conversation on some of the environmental challenges residents of the southeastern flank of Grenada is experiencing. And I want to welcome at this time Mr. Roger England. Mr. England, thank you so much for staying with us and for being patient today.
Good morning to everyone.
Absolutely.
We're going to move to the other side of La Sapina, from Prickly Bay to Mount Hartman Bay.
Yes.
The same problems.
Just same challenges there.
A little bit behind. Mr.
Yeah,
Redhead, that's all.
absolutely. But I want you to react to or piggyback on the conversation Mr. Redhead and Mr. Husbands was having here in respect of these unusually high amounts of sewer discharge in the True Blue area.
Well, we don't have that problem on the other side of Lansopine quite yet. We don't have any major developments, although one was planned. We have plenty of yachties, but now the reason I'm here to talk to you, you invited me, is because of this idea to have an industrial boatyard located in what is now virgin mangroves forests along that line the coast, as you probably know, all the way around from the Dove Sanctuary right around to Secret Harbor. And this proposal for an industrial boatyard would destroy a large proportion of those mangroves, which we just cannot afford to do. So that's the sort of broad background. There's been tremendous opposition, and we found ourselves in the center of it. By we, I mean the Coral Cove Group. We're a bunch of about 330 subscribers to the coralcovegrenada.org website. And there's been, people are up in arms about the idea that you can put an industrial boatyard at the top of Mount Hartman Bay, where there is no current to take away the contaminations that boatyards will bring. If I could just say, if anybody's not clear what a boatyard is, it's not a nice little marina with people having fun and so on. It's a massive, great haul-out facility where huge catamarans can be dragged out of the sea, put on stilts, and then cleaned down, scrubbed, sanded, sandblasted, to remove all the old poisons that have been put deliberately on the bottom of the boat to stop aquatic life growing on the boat. The yachties call it anti-fouling paint. We call it aquatic poisons. All of these poisons are going to leach down into the land, into the sea, through what's left of the mangroves. And this is a very sensitive little area. If you ask Woburn fishermen where their baby fish come from, they come from here. The mangroves are the nurseries for baby fish, which soon become big fish and soon become caught fish for the fishermen. And they're in serious risk for the poisons that are now going to be generated by this boatyard if it goes ahead. So we're opposing it. That's the basics.
Absolutely. And I'm going to quote from the email circular we received from you. You said, quote, and this is from the Coral Cove Group when I say you here, you said, quote, we have now submitted an application for judicial review to the court. This aims to have the planning consent quashed. We claim that the decision to grant planning consent was unlawful because A, the authority failed to give any reasons for not imposing conditions on the permission that limited the removal of mangroves and required the replanting of mangroves, contrary to recommendations of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Climate Resilience. 2, it was irrational not to impose such conditions. 3, the authority failed to give any reasons for not imposing other conditions recommended by the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Climate Resilience and the Environment that would have mitigated the impact of the development. And 4, the authority had a duty at common law to consult on the proposal and failed to carry out a legally adequate consultation. So what I hear you saying here, what I hear the Coral Cove Group saying here is that, again, the physical planning unit of Grenada dropped the ball. There doesn't appear to be any proper due diligence.
Well, I'm afraid I'd have to agree with you. The little complication about this is that the application for this boatyard was submitted under the old government administration, under the old Planning and Development Authority, which had been handpicked by the previous government. When our government changed in June last year, the Planning and Development Authority has, since then, the Planning and Development Authority has been seriously strengthened and changed. There's a whole new board, there's a whole new staff, there's a whole new budget. So when we talk about the deficiencies of the Planning and Development Authority. It's a little bit complicated, like before or after. The fact of the matter is that the present Planning and Development Authority is very sympathetic to the idea that this is not the place to have a boatyard. Nevertheless, it was approved, planning consent was given. So the list that you just read out is our basis for taking the Planning and Development Authority to judicial review. In case your audience here doesn't know exactly what judicial review is, it's not just saying the decision was wrong. It's saying to a government agency, the way you made that decision was wrong. It was illegal. It was irrational. You didn't do X, Y, and Z that any normal person would expect to be done in those circumstances.
So let us talk about. Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Finish your thought process.
What is important to know as well is that the government could have avoided this judicial review by simply revoking the planning consent. The law allows them to revoke that planning consent without compensation to the developer if the development starts to violate the conditions that the consent was given. All planning consents have conditions, and the law says if you violate those conditions, the planning consent can be cancelled, removed, revoked. So we're trying to convince the planning authority that's exactly what they should do. Now they've all gone very quiet because we've taken them to court on the judicial review. So I guess they might be under instructions not to have so many discussions at the moment, because obviously that's a decision whether to do that or not involves the Attorney General and not just the Planning and Development Authority. So to cut it long story short, we have submitted a letter before claim, which means this is our case. If you don't shape up, we're going to go to court. We have heard nothing, no response whatsoever. So we have gone to court.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk about the status of the judicial review? Are you still at the application stage? Or has the matter been heard yet? Do you have a court date?
It's been submitted, and relatively recently it's been submitted. We have heard that the government intends to contest the case, but that's as far as we know at the moment. So any time now, we're expecting to hear from the government what their case is, why they want to contest our watertight, our watertight case. So we're waiting for that, but it's not. It's happened. It's in the court now. It's in the first stages of being in court. Mm-hmm. So I'll report to you later.
While that pending litigation is making its way through the courts, is there any basis upon which the project would be paused, or can they just decide, you know what, while this matter is pending, you go ahead with your boatyard?
Well, that's always a very good case with judicial review proceedings, because the thing against doing them is that they take so long that if a developer is really aggressive, they could have developed it anyway by the time it's finished in the courts, and then they find they weren't supposed to develop it in the first place. So what we've said to them is that they should, because of the violations, the authority should issue an enforcement notice and a stop notice to stop work instantly on everything while the case goes through the courts. So again, we've heard nothing from them on whether they would consider doing this or why if they're not, why wouldn't they? It's the obvious thing to do, and that would then save all the judicial review, because the project would be temporarily stopped, and they could then decide whether they wanted to permanently stop it by using the law, as I just described earlier, that they violated their conditions and therefore the consent can be taken away from them. Mm-hmm. That's what we would like to happen. It saves everybody a huge amount of trouble. Mm-hmm. And then the developer would have to apply again under. One of the things that happened was that under the old administration, when the application for this development was submitted for planning consent, they, as they're obliged to do, asked for the opinion, sent all the documents and the proposals to the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Climate, the Ministry of the Environment, and all relevant bodies like that. And they had reports back from the experts in those ministries that they then proceeded to ignore. And we're saying, why did you ask for them? These are responsible government agencies who are supposed to have a view, and the views were very much against the boatyard. They were all about, what are you going to do about all these mangroves, and what are you going to do about the contamination? Because the application was woefully inadequate in terms of what it would do to stop the undesirable stuff happening. There was not hardly anything was done on it. So that's the story. That's the story, really.
But are you surprised, though? You said that you've heard, I suppose, through different channels that government, first of all, they have not been responding to you, but you said that they plan to challenge it. Are you surprised, especially against the juxtaposition that you were hoping, you said you were hoping that given the new administration, given the rhetoric on this issue, some of them at least when they were in opposition, that they are in essence moving forward with the project in the way that the previous administration approved it?
Good point. It's a very, very good point. I think, and I've said this to the planning development, here's your chance to show, here's a new broom and we're sweeping clean. We're not putting up with this rubbish that used to happen before, with things going through on the nod because you knew who you knew. Now's your chance to show that this is all being done properly. So don't lose it. That I don't know what the authority think about that, as opposed to what the Attorney General will be thinking about it. They'll be making up their minds. But as far as we hear, they are going to contest it.
Okay.
So yes, I'm surprised. I am surprised because they haven't taken this opportunity, and that seems to be the spirit that they've come in to do. We're going to do things differently. They've listened to us, and they're trying to reformulate the authority to act in a different way. You see, one of the things that's happened in the past under the old administration, they didn't want you to know that an application had been submitted. You had to keep going down to the planning authority and looking at the books to see if anybody wanted to build a skyscraper next to your house. There was no way that they were alerting people. So that's why some of these bigger schemes in the past have all ended up in judicial review, because it's too late to do anything else. It's too late to convince the authority in the process of their decision making and to bring facts of the environmental destruction that the project would bring. There's no chance to do that. We weren't given the opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Redhead, you've been sitting here, I suppose, smiling in exasperation. Let's bring you in here. So you have been at the forefront of notions of sustainability, issues of sustainability, climate resilience. Again, and I say this all the time, whenever we go to COP summits, we talk about environmental protection, we talk about climate resilience, we talk a good talk, we talk about notions of climate justice and what has been done to destroy our islands, and here we are
facilitating
singing from another hymn sheet, if you will. Your thoughts, Mr. Redhead?
I have too many thoughts right now, but I'll lead with this. We have a culture of as a day, leave a day. And what happens is, just as Mr. England said, we get to the point where the project starts or is completed. Says, well, it's already there. There were comments along those lines from Mr. Husbands as well. I myself have met with the Residents Association here, with the Planning Division in the past. And I would say to you, Mr. England, I am happy with your hope and your optimistic view of the change of administration. But I have been dealing with these issues through many administrations, through many ministers, through many MPs in the region, through many PSs. And the issues remain, despite the advocacy, despite the expert opinions, despite all that has happened with, as Dr. Bubb says, with the COPs, with a raising of awareness of environmental and issues of pollution. Mr. England, you don't need an industrial boatyard to pollute. My family is subjected to the smell of diesel, gas, and chemicals on a daily basis because the yachties in this area will pull their dinghies and their canoes and stuff up onto the beaches in Triblu, scrape the stuff off here, just like the big, powerful catamarans on the travel lifts in the industrial boatyards, and paint it back with no thought for the paint is spilling on the ground, the paint is spilling on the beach, the paint is spilling in the sea. And you are absolutely correct, Mr. England. These chemicals are beyond toxic. They are very toxic to humans and to the natural world. So I would say to you that, yes, I applaud all your efforts. I am less optimistic of your success because I've been doing this for so long. What I would do is encourage you, join with you, and I will continue to do my part. Talk about the mangroves. We've spoken about a recent case in the country where we were told there were conditions, yet still the developer went along and bulldozed everything. So the conditions mean nothing if they are not, Dr. Bubb, as you mentioned to Mr. Husbands earlier, enforced. Enforcement is a huge issue. We have marine protected areas that are being violated all the time because there's no enforcement. We have many laws on the books of Grenada that require things and there are penalties for things, and they are not enforced. They are not enforced through ignorance of those who have the job to enforce. They are not enforced through a lack of appropriate authority being given. And a big one, when people try to do their jobs and the people are doing them well, they are chastised because, just as Mr. England said, who you knew, who did what, who's somebody's friend, or what somebody wants. Or, as I said, a general lack of understanding. Several years ago, I told the Ministry of Climate Resilience that before they could have an effective climate resilient ministry, they needed to ensure that the cabinet of the country was climate resilient. If you do not have resilient cabinet that understand what resilience and environmentalism is, you cannot expect them to implement policies and guidelines and laws that are compliant. So we have a huge job of education, but we are gone past the position of education on many issues, and we need to delve deeply into enforcement. Some of the property... Sorry, one last thing. I'm told a lot of the large construction development that has happened in Grenada in the last decade has had adequate plans drawn up by professionals in very many areas. The problem is there's no follow through by the department, the divisions and stuff in the ministries. So the developers build what they feel like building. So they will go along and you get a state-of-the-art sewage system, put it in your plan, get approval, and then go back and build whatever you feel like because no one visits the site. And when the residents in the area complain, we're told, well, it's there already, you know? So one of my neighbors on a weekly basis buys 5 or 6 gallons of bleach. She walks down the road or she gets someone to help her take the bleach down the road and pours it in one of the outfalls of sewage because she just can't sleep at night with the smell. And I know of another resident who's just given up and is soon to leave the area. The trees don't even flower or bear fruit in these areas anymore because of the toxicity of the soil. So God forbid, and there are people planning to develop in these areas, what could potentially happen?
And we have not even gotten to the impact on the food chain, the archipelagic species that are in our territorial waters, and the fact that fish, they are ingesting sewer, which we are consuming.
That is correct.
So there is that as well. But what we want to do is to get to some viewer comments here. May is saying, money in a poor man's world. Politicians at their best. Martin Felix is saying, the use of drones is a good idea. I'm hearing lots of talk about the problem. What about law enforcement? If a poor person defecates publicly and is caught, they would likely be prosecuted. Why should foreigners and the rich not face sanctions?
Great.
Your thoughts on that analogy there?
Spot
Martin,
on.
that's an excellent analogy.
I disagree with you.
I have said many times already publicly that if I walked down the street and did what I had to do in my neighbor's yard, the whole world would be against me. But I have to be arguing with people. Listen, I can tell you right now what the yachts people here are cooking for breakfast and dinner because they are that close to the shore. I see them scraping their plates of food into the water after they've eaten. And I say, well, why would you do that? I don't scrape all my waste into the streets. I don't scrape all my waste into my yard to attract rats and mice and other vermin. So why are you scraping it into the sea? Oh, it's biodegradable. I didn't know the chicken bones were biodegradable. I didn't know that listen, at any one point in time, if you walk the beaches of the south of the island, you can find all manner of food. Yes, they're biodegradable within reason, and if they're properly composted, but otherwise they become health hazards. Yes, there are aspects of wealth and money involved here, but I'm not saying all yachties are rich people. Some of them may very well be ordinary working class people who have decided to live on a boat. But I'm just saying that if you're living on a boat, why would you defecate and throw your waste and garbage right where you are living? You should value the ocean enough to understand the ocean is your home. But apparently it doesn't apply to everyone. I am told by good authority that it is not all of them. But as Mr. England said, sometimes you have these chemicals listen, I see it every day, man. Like I have had cases where my family cannot even breathe properly here because of the oil in the water, right? There are countries that we don't have to come up with this stuff, Dr. Bob and Mr. England. We can seek the assistance of those who are ahead of us in the industry. There are places on earth right now with thriving yachting industries that do not support these practices. There are places on this earth where you cannot have a boat with toxic paint on it, Mr. England. You cannot have paint that uses a lead-based paint and sail through some waters in this world. Why should we not, as pure Grenada, aspire to these things? I'm not saying tomorrow flick a light switch and it's there. Build a path to this goal. But it does not seem like we have the proper political will. I get a lot of flack, and God knows after this program, Dr. Bob, I will hear all about it. But I will continue to make the sacrifice.
Absolutely. The people who would want to give you flack, perhaps they should spend a week where you live. Yes? And then let them face the music. Let's get to another viewer comment. Margaret Francis is saying, were the communities consulted? And this is directed to you, Mr. England. I ask because Grenada is a signatory to treaties that requires community inputs on developments like these, in reference to that boatyard. The most recent being the Escazú Agreement, and ironically, Grenada was recently elected to the committee to ensure compliance with the agreement.
Yes, I'm well aware of that, and that's a great development for us that the lady concerned has been admitted to that group. Yes. Well, yes, I agree. It's obvious that it's needed, and let me just say that one of the I wouldn't be as pessimistic as Mr. Redhead is, but that is why we end up in court, because it's very difficult to do anything else, and that's the last resort. And it's not a very effective remedy, but it's the only one that takes it out of government hands, we hope. But what surprises me is that, and Dr. Bubb, you mentioned this, we talk the talk. The politicians talk the talk. Our new Prime Minister seems to be very environmentally minded. He says the right things. That's why I'm surprised that they're not calling off this boatyard thing, because they could if they wanted to, and they could show that they really mean business, but they haven't. So
and Mr. Vincent Roberts. Vincent, again, my sympathies on the passing of Madonna Harford. I understand you are related as well. Mr. England, that's Mr. Vincent Roberts. He's saying, Mr. England, first they came, is very apt to the situation. When they came for Silver Sands, everyone was quiet. Now they're coming for Coral Cove. Thoughts?
Well, I wasn't around in the Silver Sands. Well, I was around, but I wasn't involved in it. I don't know the story of what happened in Silver Sands. My imagination, but I know the story in Coral Cove very well. That's why we're called the Coral Cove Group, because when that land changed hands, the plan was to replace a few little cottages there. You perhaps know it's called Coral Cove Cottages. It's a real self-catering, small little thing with 100-odd bed hotel, 5-story building on this tiny little site where turtles nest, and antique forest has been growing. One of the last little centers of antique forest left in the Lancapine area. So yes, we opposed it tooth and nail. Unfortunately, for the time being, we've been successful and it's gone on the back burner, but it'll come back. At some point, it'll come back. And
Let's take yes, absolutely. Let's take two more viewer comments, and then we'll close the segment to get to Mr. Brian Grimes, who has been waiting patiently there. Jimmy Henry, Mr. Husbands just demonstrated the inefficiency and inadequacy of implementing mandates or laws that benefits the nation with the justification and excuses when no one wants to implement policy. Sir Redhead, thoughts?
I only have compliments from Mr. Husbands and Nawasa and the other utilities on the island. I've traveled widely. I work with people all over the world. And generally speaking, the utilities in Grenada are fantastic. Mm-hmm. However, Mr. Husbands, like many others, are constrained by law and by resources. And who is responsible for providing the laws and the resources? The government. We put them there for that. Mr. England is correct. He has great hope. I have less because, as I said, I've been here through several iterations of administrations. We've been protesting. We do all these things and it's not working. I will continue to do, I'm optimistic to the point I will be on the next program and invited to. I will continue to post online. I will attend every meeting I can. But unless we change the narrative completely, unless we get the ministers, the PSs and stuff to understand, and obviously the current construct is not working. There may be changes. The changes are not fast enough. We are being left behind, and the consequences are concreting themselves to the point we cannot revert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course, yes, go ahead, Mr. England.
I agree with that 100%. And something we just must keep on. This is really important to Grenada. It's one of the most important aspects of the survival and the success and sustainability of this island. If we go on destroying our natural assets at the rate we're going on now, and you mentioned it's a joke, pure Grenada. It's not very pure, and it's getting less pure. From the government to the people to the school kids must understand that the beauty of Little Grenada is our asset. We don't have diamond mines or anything like that. We have a beautiful little island. And what are we doing? We're polluting it as fast as we can. We're building all over it as fast as we can. People need houses. People need jobs. We know that. But there's a place to do things and a place not to do things. And if there's one thing that we really need in this country is the zoning policy for where you can do things and where you can't do things. Then we wouldn't be fighting this because people wouldn't be putting in applications for boatyards in a place like Mount Hartman Bay. But that, Mr. Redhead's right, that takes resources. It takes resolve, but it also takes resources. We have, I think the laws that we have, the planning law we have is a decent law. I don't know who wrote it, but I think it's very, very good. But we don't always have the resources to make sure that it is enforced. And that's back to the points that you were saying earlier. Enforcement is essential because people don't do it voluntarily. They'll do what Mr. Redhead says. The drawings come in. Oh yeah, we'll pass that. That's that. And that was the case with the Coral Cove Hotel. They passed the outline planning consent for this ridiculous hotel, which is based on connecting to the municipal sewer system, which doesn't exist. And again, I can't remember if it's Mr. Redhead who said this, that we don't have the resources in terms of the experts to go out and keep monitoring this stuff. So once you've got your permission, once you've got your consent, you can do what you like, really. No one's going to come and check it out. They don't have the resources to, even if they wanted to. Think how many buildings are going on in this country, and there's shortcuts going on all over the place. and we haven't got the resources to keep it. We just can't monitor that. We've got to be really, really much tighter on who we give consent to, and on what conditions we give that consent, so that at least the community can monitor what's going on, which is what we've done with regard to Coral Cove and the boatyard in Mount Hartman. We try.
Absolutely. Yes. Gentlemen, some final comments before we get to the final segment of the day?
Well,
I just like to. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Redhead.
Okay, I just made mine, so I'll leave it to you, Reserve.
Okay.
Mine is Grenada. This is important. We mustn't mess up our biggest asset, which is our lovely little island.
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, I'd like to say Grenada is not unique. The fight exists all over the world. I am not unique. There are persons like myself, Mr. England, and others trying their best all over the world every day to make a difference. But I do think that there are enough good examples out there that we can copy. And rather than wait, I remember years ago we had to wait long to see a movie in the cinema. Now we can see a movie when it's released. We need to get to that point of leading, not waiting for somebody else to think, or not waiting for the problem to exacerbate to the point of it's a major issue. We need to lead, and to lead, we need to put ourselves in the position of understanding, of knowing, and seeking the resources to take action to have a positive impact. Thanks.
Absolutely. Mr. Redhead and Mr. England, thank you for appearing on the Bubb Report this week. We, on the Bubb Report, we have been consistent on this issue. So for those who are saying, well, why are you silent on this? Why were you silent on this before June 23rd last year? We have been covering environmental issues on the Bubb Report when we started. In fact, some of our first initial programs were on some of the concerns that environmentalists had in respect of what was happening at La Sagesse and Livera, and we see what happened there. So, and these folks, Mr. England, Mr. Redhead, they have been talking about this before June 23rd last year. So, gentlemen, thank you for being on the Bubb Report this week.
Thank you, Dr. Bubb. Thank you, Mr. England.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, we will take a quick break, and we will come back with Mr. Brian Grimes, who is here to pay tribute to the dearly departed Sister Madonna Harford, who passed away in Germany while receiving medical attention in that country. So please stand by.
Very proud of what you're doing, and I think it's much needed. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you again for watching the Bubb Report. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you sincerely. Ashley, thank you so very much. Senator Chester Humphrey, welcome to the Bubb Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program. The Honorable Jumani Williams, we call him Jumani, who is the public advocate for the city of New York. The Honorable Baz Diopande, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pandey, welcome to the Bubb Report of Grenada. The Honorable Tobias Clement. Mr. Clement, welcome to the Bubb Report. Is it Nicolai or Nikolai? I hope I pronounced it.
Nikolai.
It's Nikolai. Thank you.
Yes.
And welcome to the program, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist. Mr. Randall Robinson, you are here in your private capacity and in your personal capacity. Yesterday, we learned that you were detained by law enforcement in Grenada. So you come from a family of public servants.
Yes, we are a family of public servants.
So you're saying that you have to do more, but my question is, what have you done as President of the Union to ensure that that happens?
To the cards that I have drawn, that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are? And welcome back, viewers and listeners. At this time, we pause to pay tribute to the dearly departed Sister Madonna Harford. And I will be a bit unconventional here at this moment. And I want us to pause for a minute of silence. May her soul rest in peace. Mr. Brand Grimes, welcome to the Bubb Report. So thank you for being so patient and thank you for waiting in the wind here this morning. I will try not to be emotional, but Madonna, Sister Madonna would want us to carry on. So you are, of course, her successor. You filling very big shoes there. You're filling the shoes of Lorette Clarkson, Sister Madonna Harford, Rachel Roberts. Very big shoes. Let us talk about how the union plans to remember Sister Madonna. But before we get to that, I learned yesterday that even during Sister Madonna's illness, she was still very actively engaged on the sidelines in supporting union work. In fact, she was at the PWU internal elections, as I understand it. So talk to us about that enduring commitment that she had to the union, even in retirement.
Yes, Dr. Bob, thanks for, are you hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
great. Good morning or good day to the viewers and listeners across all, sectors, whether you're viewing online, Facebook, wherever you are, good morning. It's always a pleasure being on your program. Unfortunately, the reason today it's not one that comes with any level of happiness or joy. It's a bit of an unfortunate situation, even though death is promised to all of us, but it's something that human beings cannot get accustomed to when we value those that we love. So I just want to start off by just encapsulating some words from others, because it's hard to really put into words how Sister Madonna, the impact she had on others. So my duty is to sort of try and do this today, but I will use the words of others to begin this program. So I want to quote from Steve Joseph, and these words just came from Facebook and people just expressing their condolences and so forth. Steve Joseph is the president of the Dominica Public Service Union, and he said simply, she was a Caribbean woman of worth and purpose whom we salute. Condolences, comrades. May she rest in peace. Christopher Julian, I think he's a teacher. He said, wow, a great leader who stood for workers' rights and defended freedom's cause. A woman who had grit and fortitude and did not capitulate to the powers that be. Rest in peace. Carol Paul, a former public officer, said, oh my God, OMG, Mrs. Harford was a hard-working union leader. I loved her so much. Rest in peace. May you fly high with the angels. Sleep in perfect peace. You fought for me personally. Sorry you've gone too soon and you will be missed. And Ray Payne, a current public officer at the Ministry of Finances, a beautiful soul who served this country selflessly. Your works will be etched in the history and hearts of many, and will certainly be in the annals of history, in the memory and hearts of many, and will certainly be in the annals of history. Sleep in perfect peace, Mrs. H. Yes, so those are some of the words of just some of the words. As you can imagine, it's overwhelming on all platforms, social media and otherwise. What do we plan to do as a union? This thing happened fairly suddenly, and I have not consulted with my team as yet. But we will find a way. We will find a way to immortalize Mrs. Harford. Her works speaks for itself, and we'll do our best to find a way to give her, respectful tribute as she more than deserves.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mrs. Harford was very passionate about continuity in the union, and I suspect you probably know this too. That of course you joined the ranks as in the youth arm of the Public Workers Union. What influence or what role did Mrs. Harford play in influencing your interest in trade unionism?
Well, what influence? I would say everything. I came to the union as a public officer, temporary, serving in the customs department for a number of years and not having permanent status. At the time I came to the union, I was having a lot of personal issues. My dad his body was racked with cancer and he was suffering. He was my best friend. So I needed some sort of refuge, a place to go. And Mrs. Harford during her tenure, Sister Harford during her tenure, one thing that she did that was extremely outstanding, she had a lot of empowerment sessions, education sessions, youth building sessions, and names were randomly pulled, right? Basically to come and attend those sessions, and Brian Grimes happened to be one of those names. And I could remember it as if it was yesterday, in 2007 thereabout. We were having this session, and at that time, was extremely shy. So she called upon me. She said, "Young Prince, stand up and tell us about yourself." So I stood and I shyly said, "My name is Brian Grimes. I am attached to the customs department." And I sat down and I looked at her, and there was some sort of satisfaction. You could see that she was looking at me with some sort of interest, that she saw something in me that I did not see in myself. And this is not unique to me, but what I can say is she did a lot in terms of empowering me, pushed me to certain levels. And one thing I can say about Mrs. Harford is that she was extremely, extremely comfortable in her skin and in being able to nurture others, right? And develop others. She found life, she found energy in helping others be the best selves that they can be. And she certainly did that with me. In fact, you spoke about youth development. She pioneered something within the Caribbean. Before, in the trade union movement, the older heads will govern the whole movement, the labor movement, so to speak. But when she went to regional workshops, she's the one that pushed the youth groups and just the groups in general. And she pioneered something by saying, listen, we need a youth on executives across the Caribbean. So she started that. I was not the original pick. It was so funny, because the Caribbean Public Service Association, the CPSA, they had a session, right? This is basically, the CPSA is the umbrella body for public service unions in the Caribbean. And every year, in alphabetical order, we go to different countries. So in 2009, thereabout, CPSA came to Grenada. So we had our youth group and so forth. And the chair, who at that time, Sister Candia Hayward, she was the chairperson of the youth group. I was the deputy chair because Ms. Harford was trying to pull me along to just participate in these things. And I was like, okay, let me come along. But what happened there? It just so happened that Candia Hayward met her next youth from Bermuda by the name of Jason Hayward, right? And they fell in love. Well, Hayward wasn't a name at the time, but eventually they became one. They married. So she left Grenada. She actually left Grenada, and then as a result of that, Jason actually is the Minister of Labor in Bermuda right now. So that just goes to show the power and the development the trade union movement has in terms of developing young persons. But apart from that, we needed a youth rep, right? And I had to step up as the vice chair. And because of what Ms. Harford was pioneering, I had to be the one to step in on the national executive to sit under the leadership. So I sat in the presence of people like Adrian Francis, Brother Adrian Francis, Brother Ray Roberts, Sister Madonna Harford, Sister Rachel, as just, an observer, looking at leadership, looking at how meetings are conducted, listening to the conversation. And I just went from strength to strength and fell in love with the movement, just being able to be given that opportunity. And let me tell you, I sat quietly, but at times Ms. Harford would ensure that my point of view came across. So when we had to vote and when opinions had to be given, she would say, "Young Grimes, what do you think?" And then I would volunteer my thoughts and so forth. So I felt very, very empowered in that environment. So as a nurturer, Sister Madonna Harford is second to none.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let us talk about, during her tenure as president of the Public Workers Union. As I said in my editorial, she inherited the leadership of the union at a very challenging time economically for Grenada, in which workers were asked to make some serious sacrifice during a period of serious IMF impose austerity or wage increase freezes, right? Certainly that was not something that perhaps the rank and file of the union wanted to hear. But nonetheless, she pressed on with joining the national community in making that shared sacrifice, even through the period of that as well. So talk to us about how she was in navigating those difficult times.
Yes, I was listening to your editorial, and you spoke about the fact that she was born around the period of, is it Janet?
Hurricane Janet, 1955.
Yes, Hurricane Janet. So basically, she was formed in the crucible of struggle. Well, her period in time as president, she served for 10 years as president, but her work in the union began long before that. She was a stalwart long before that. So basically, she had a 10-year period. And 2003 to 2013 was a period, right, that she served in a capacity as president. And you know what happened in 2004. We had Hurricane Ivan. So one of the first things she had to do as president was to ensure that the CSA building was rebuilt. There was a lot of controversy with that. In fact, lawsuits took place and things of that nature. And eventually, we were able to move back into the Public Workers Union building, formerly known as CSA, through the hard work and the determination of Sister Harford after the building was basically, destroyed by Ivan. I can say she, in her period, she elevated youth. One thing that we are trying to now recapture within the GPW is the amount of workshops and empowerment sessions that we do, which I was a part of, which many were a part of, right? That is lacking, and we will try our best to sort of, reconstruct that and reinvigorate that. Because Miss Harford was the perfect servant leader in my book. She did not necessarily care about herself, but she cared about the development of others. She felt threatened by no one. She was comfortable in her skin. So to give you that example, all the presidents coming after her, she mentored each one of us. She mentored Brother Adrian Francis, who succeeded her in 2013. Sister Rachel Roberts, she mentored her, and she became president, I believe, in 2017. And she also mentored me, which is a known fact. I became president in 2021. So she has her fingerprints over all the leaders that succeeded her, right? Again, I can't repeat it enough, but the aspect of development of, women, youth, whoever, this is what she had a strong hold on in terms of workshops on education, workshops on money management. This is why at that time, I believe there was a little bit more camaraderie within the union. Miss Harford by nature was a people's person. She was a social butterfly. I tell you, she enters a room, immediately it lights up. Right? Immediately it lights up. Her presence is felt. Her radiant smile, everybody. She engages everyone at all levels. She had the ability to interact with the people at the highest level. She was a permanent secretary, obviously, which is one of the highest posts within the public service. But she will go down to the lowest level of worker and feel just as comfortable. So all spheres, she felt comfortable there. The first protest I partook in, it was led by Sister Harford, and that was in 2012, Dr. Bob. I don't know if you recall that, but the nurses marched because I think it was under the Tillman Thomas led administration. Some nurses were receiving $700 as a stipend while they were giving full service to the nation. And Sister Harford, Brother Ray Roberts, and others led that protest, and that was my first taste of protest and understanding what social justice is. And something Sister Harford has not been given enough credit for in this country is the fact that she basically started the pension struggle. And what do I mean by that? Miss Hermelin Armstrong Cox, it was Miss Harford that was able to cajole her to say, listen, we have to do something about this pension matter. How about you take this matter to court? And a judgment was given after that. I think it was in the period, say in 2012, just on the eve or the penultimate year when Miss Harford was exiting. But she, having foresight, realized that this matter has to be solved through the court system and not through protests or other means, because subsequent governments have been so stubborn in trying to, resolve this matter. So she started that process. It was the beginning, and she was the one that, ensured that that individual, that particular worker, felt empowered enough to take the government to court, which was a big deal at that time. And to a degree, it still is something very big. And something I want to say, what I love about Sister Harford is how she maintained her femininity. Now, in the trade union movement, it can sometimes be rough and tumble, but Miss Harford was able to still have that, be clothed in her motherly qualities and still be able to be firm and stand up to the powers that be, stand up to all and be at the table with all and sundry and still command that respect. It was very unusual. I was speaking to one of the tenants at the Grenada Public Workers Union last night, and he was saying to me, wow, I didn't know she passed, because I informed him and everything. And he said, I've never heard her raise her voice or anything like that. So she never had to raise her voice, but just her presence alone commanded respect from all and sundry. And that is something that is remarkable.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mr. Grimes, any final comments?
Well, like I stated, it's an unfortunate time, but that is something that comes. None of us can escape it. But what I would want to encourage us to do is cherish the memories, and celebrate all the achievements of Mrs. Harford, Sister Harford. For me personally, I will use this in whatever way possible, because she mentored me. She was a constant reservoir of wisdom, a source of knowledge for me, to just, dig down in my term here to ensure that her legacy is not left out, right? We will do what we can to immortalize her. In fact, before her passing, I was discussing with selected members of council, and I plan to bring it to council very soon. I hope they forgive me for bringing this out here, but we are going to rename a section of the union after her, because we wanted to celebrate her while she was alive, right? But it did not happen. We will follow through with this without any doubt. But I also want to encourage everybody to, just remember the good, remember all the achievements, remember the humanity, remember the love that she gave, and let us use this to fuel the Grenada Public Workers Union and the trade union movement in general. Her memory will live on, Miss Harford, as long as a labor movement exists in Grenada, Carriacou, and Pidi Martinique, and in fact the region. Her name will never ever be forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Rest in peace, rest in eternal peace to Miss Madonna Harford. Solidarity forever. Mr. Grimes, thank you again for agreeing on such short notice to be on the Bubb Report this week.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Viewers and listeners, Mr. Brian Grimes is the president of the Grenada Public Workers Union, who has been plunged into mourning following the really untimely and premature death of one of its presidents, former presidents, Mrs. Madonna Harford, who also served in the Grenada Public Service, rising to the role of permanent secretary. She was also an avid viewer, an avid fan of the Bubb Report, making contributions in the comment section, thought-provoking, constructive, positive, well-meaning contributions in the comment section every Sunday. And I would call her after the show just to get some feedback from her in respect of how the show went. And she was always willing and excited to offer that advice. And it's something that I really leaned on. So I do want to extend my condolences to her immediate and extended family. Of course, Mrs. Harford was a mom to wonderful children who are all blazing their own trails. So I want to extend my deepest condolences to her family at this time. Viewers and listeners, on behalf of the producers of the Bubb Report, I'm your humble host, Dr. Kellen Bubb. We thank you for tuning in this week. We will see you next week for another installment of the Bubb Report. Take care now. Bye-bye.